Nothing tastes better than a nice cold beer on a Friday afternoon in the hot Texas sun. It is hot out today, but it's Friday and I finally have a few minutes to spare to mess around with the old tbox-Fox sitting here behind me. I know it's been a while, but I've been swamped between my garage rehab projects, getting caught up with some of the customer cars and everything else. I haven't had much time to play with this car. If you guys haven't seen the rest of the series or the videos that I've done on this car, make sure to go and check them out because, well, it's sort of come a long way. This was a car that I picked up for $1,000 cash, and I was going to strip it for all its parts, and every time that I was messing around with it, well, I found more and more decent parts, and the community got an uproar of, why would you strip that car? But I think what really did it is when ultimately I cut the springs down and I put the 19-inch wheels on, and it just sort of made the car look a little bit more badass. So since then, myself and Gary from Castle Customs have decided that we are going to drive this car all the way up to Motor City Fox Fest in July. That's right. This shipbox is going to go on a, I don't even know how many miles it is, probably like 1,500 miles and change or something like that, all the way up from Texas to Detroit. So be sure to follow that along. Gary's actually flying down in a couple of weeks, and we are going to get tons of content. Motors coming out, we're gonna re-gasket, reseal what we need to, do the steering rack, do bushings, do control arms, service the diff, four-wheel disc brakes, and actually full brake upgrade. And I need to give a shout out to Tom Clark, aka Sinus Built. Check out these Cadillac Brembo ATS calipers that he powder coated, and he even got the tbox-Fox logo right in there. So these things look gorgeous. Thank you again, Tom, for those. And you can see inside the car, it is jam-packed, and that is all donations. We just want to thank you guys so much, because if it wasn't for the donations and everything else, guys, ultimately I would have stripped this car. Now this car is going to get a second life and a pretty cool story. So let's get into today's fun, our Friday afternoon adventure. And if you look down in this little Rubbermaid here, we got some suspension, and there was a video where I talked a little bit about this stuff, guys, and ultimately this right here is infamous project prototype coilovers, and the rear is a adjustable spring perch style setup, and these have been tested out. The fronts have not. The reason why the fronts haven't been tested is because, well, these are SN95 top mounts. So I need to try and find a way to get these to fit in the upper strut towers of a Fox. So I'm gonna be jacking up the car, I'm gonna be pulling out the strut, pulling out the spring. I'm gonna see if I can make these fit. So I've already done a little bit of recon, so to speak, and I need to find some of my parts so hopefully we can make this happen. I'm missing a strut, so I'm missing a coilover. Whew, car's hot. All right, guys, so after a trip to my commercial shop to make sure that I wasn't going insane and that I didn't have the coilover there, and a couple beers later, once I got back, going around everywhere, and I'm like, man, did I throw this thing in the back of a car when I was cleaning out the garage? Where did it go? And in the end, it ended up being in a box that was absolutely buried in the back of the car here. So I found it. So here is the other coilover. And this one, I have modified the top plate, and we're going to get into that in a minute here. You can see there's only two big holes, and this one's got three with some studs sticking through. So I'm going to explain this in a minute. First things first, let's get this thing jacked up off the ground, and let's get the strut out of the car that's in here now. So I have a feeling I might need to drive up on a 2x4, maybe two, in order to get this jack under there, but let's see. on that. So the car always fires up. Amazingly enough, the check engine light wasn't on this time. So maybe all this cycling, driving, starting it up is helping it out. Oh, look, we lost a mud dauber here. Mud daubers are all over this car, guys. I wonder if that shot... Ooh, look at them all. Spiders. Oh, look at those. Look at them all, whole family. I made a mess. I'm gonna have to pressure wash this off later. Man, see, spiders don't bother me that much. It's the snakes that really get me. So anyways, we got the clearance here. We can jack the car up, pull the hood off, get the caliper off, get the strut out, the spring out, all that other good stuff. So let's get at it. Did you guys see that reel on Instagram where the guy shows you how to bend this little clip in to make sure that the stands don't come out? I'm not gonna lie, I was one of those guys that never knew that that was a thing. So if you don't want the tops coming out, just bend that little stupid tab in. Oh guys, look at that sky over there. I said we might get a thunderstorm. You see how tall the corn is? So like privacy fence, love it. All right, so let's get all this top stuff out now, and that way we can start messing with our coilover. All right guys, so we have everything out in terms of strut, coil spring, and everything that we need to put this coilover in. All right guys, so let's talk suspension for a minute here. And I'm sure there's no argument that suspension is in fact a science. And I spent hours, and I mean hours of researching factory spring rates, ride height, shock and strut specifications, everything else, and comparing them against aftermarket, everything from Eibach to Ford Motorsport stuff, to Detch, to Coney, to you name it, I looked it up. And when I was at SEMA, I met with a manufacturer who ultimately made me this prototype here that's in my hand. Now, there's a lot of factors to consider, guys, and I know that I have sort of mixed feelings and reviews about coilovers in general. And the main reason why I'm not a huge fan of coilovers is because when you go ultra low, 9 times out of 10, when you guys are installing coilovers, unless you're doing a sleeve setup where you're sleeving it over your factory strut, you guys are essentially going to be installing caster camber plates. And caster camber plates, unless you're using the cheaper BBK version that have the bushing style, you guys are going to the spherical bushing with a bunch of metal spacers, and you're eliminating the factory rubber that'll give you any type of comfort or cushion between the strut and the strut tower of your car. So keeping that in mind, I got rubber in here and the top, and this pillow mount top here, this is all solid, well not solid, but it's a rubber mount that gives a little bit of cushion. So that's the one thing that I considered. The other thing that I considered was, well, ultimate lowness. You guys know I like to go low. And with that said, I had to do tons of research on spring rates. So going down to a smaller spring, how to get it so that I can drop the car at least 4 inches lower over factory. And looking at linear versus progressive spring rates, so on and so forth. So I'm not going to give away all my secrets. All I can tell you is that I've actually got a number of other springs in here that ultimately I'm going to have to do some testing on. So the spring and the way that it's positioned is one part, and then also the actual shock that's in the middle. And one thing with these coilovers, unlike, you know, a sleeve, I can actually adjust where the housing sits. So you can see how the housing is actually starting to come out of the lower mount here. Alternatively, I can go this way, which means I am raising the amount of travel that I have coming out of the main piston for the shock. Now, if you guys look, this guy is fully open, so is this one. This strut is now fully compressed, and if you look, my ride height is pretty much sitting at a fully compressed strut. So if you guys have an Ultra Slam car and you have no travel left in your strut, well, that's not going to do you very much good. So that, in a nutshell, is where my coilover design has come from. There's 32 levels of adjustability in terms of the dampening to control the rebound and everything else that's going through the shock setup. And I mentioned before, these plates were designed for SN95. That's the only thing that they had available at the time. COVID hit, and I was in Dubai at the time. I didn't have a set of factory top mounts to ship over to them so that they could come up with a design to ultimately accommodate me. So what am I doing now? Well, I've opened up these holes and I've picked up this super cheap set of caster camber plates. These are $50 off eBay. And I have to say, the quality is actually really nice on these guys. I don't know what the bushing material and everything else is like, but grade 8 hardware, which is great, but really all I need is this. And what I'm going to be doing with this is I'm going to be using these two, hopefully. There we go. So I'm going to pass this through like so. So my plan is I'm going to get this mocked up and passed through up in there. And then if this all works, I'm going to be able to come with my own top plate, or maybe I'll just weld this one on and everything should be good. So the other thing that you guys are going to notice is that usually all of your strut or coilover stuff normally ends up bolting up on top of the strut tower, whether it's through your caster camber plate or whatever you might have. This one's just going straight up through, and I'm just going to bolt this on with these 3 bolts. So let's go take a look, bring this over to the car, and I'll show you guys firsthand what I'm talking about. Hopefully somebody doesn't steal my design here if this all works out, but I have a feeling someone probably will. So another thing that I want to mention, just as I'm saying about people stealing my design. So in the rear, this old, you know, adjustable spring perch idea, I did this back in like 2006. I forget what it was. It was actually my white Dutch coupe. I took a set of these off of an E36 BMW, a set of Bilstein PSS9s. They had these, and I bolted these up. The only difference is that, you know, all these kits nowadays, they're bolted up through the top, which is a pretty good idea because all of these threads kind of keep your spring in place. Whereas my design, I had it through the bottom of the lower control arm and you adjusted it that way. And either way, doesn't really matter. That was my concept, guys. I'm throwing that out there. If somebody else did that before me, well, by all means, tell me that you did it and show me that you did. But now every single, well, not every single coilover kit, but any adjustable spring perch for the rear essentially is coming off that principle. So back to the strut here, and we can see, like, look at where this is sitting. Isn't that just unbelievable? Like, gotta almost ask myself, like, did I go too low here? But the nice thing is the housing is pretty much flush here. This nice flexibleness, it's not clunky and it's not super stiff. Well, that's all thanks due to that rubber mount that's up in the top there. So that said, well, you know what? First things first, let's just crank this guy up here. Let's crank it up. So the one guide, ultimately, that we have is the sway bar end link. So the thing that the sway bar end link is going to do for us is it's actually going to kind of be our reference point, because I know that once this is completely sandwiched right here in between the top of the sway bar and the control arm, like that's it in terms of, you know, how low otherwise the sway bar is going to be out of whack. But that kind of gives us an idea of ultimately where we want this wheel and tire to be if that is flush against there. So I'm having troubles finding my rubbers here. Let's see if I can't. There's one. So the one thing that you can probably instantly tell is the amount of camber that is currently on the wheel. But have no fear. This is another argument that I typically have, is a lot of people with their caster camber plates think that they need all of that movement when they lower their car to be able to adjust their camber, when in reality there's enough movement in the factory positions here, so we should be able to do everything that we need to do based on that. I could be wrong. Maybe I'm going to eat my words here in a minute, but let's go ahead and set this thing down and ultimately see what it looks like. All right guys, so I have to say I think the ride height is nailed. The only thing that we have here is the extreme camber. Now the reality is, if we put some spacers on that, if we really wanted to piss people off, yeah, we know we could probably do that. So just think, keep in mind, I haven't even lowered the spring. Like, it is sitting pretty much where this cut coil was, and that's a lot of coil off that. If any of you guys know what a factory Foxbody front coil spring looks like, you're gonna know there's a lot off that. There's no isolators on top of it. It is just this guy bolted in its place, right? So that's pretty impressive. I've pretty much achieved exactly what I wanted to do out of the box, because I did not play with any settings or adjustments. I am just as low as I was with an ultimate cut front setup. So to some people out there, they're gonna understand how actually impressive that is. Some other people will be like, oh yeah, no, it's low, or it's too low, or it looks silly, or any of that stuff. But if you're watching this far into the video, then you probably got a little bit of appreciation, or maybe it's not for you, but at least you respect what I'm doing, which kudos to you guys. And well, that's what I love about Shipbox. That's what I love about Foxbodies and everything else, coming up with new ideas and new things. So question now, how do we address some of this camber? I do not know, as I have a feeling, although that this one will allow to pivot like this, but I don't know if that's ultimately going to hurt more of my toe, or if it's actually going to help with camber or not. I don't know if ultimately, and I'll loosen these up. I'm going to jack the car back up. We're going to loosen these off. I'm going to try twisting some stuff around rather, and seeing ultimately where this wheel sits. I have a feeling that it might come down to opening up this slot here a little bit. But guys, even if I open up, if I put half an inch of travel here, that half an inch here is probably going to give me all of the degrees that I need in order to get the desired camber that I want. And just think of how low this is right now. So again, for you guys that think that you need caster camber plates for all of this adjustability, on top of this adjustability when you guys are running an inch, maybe 2 inches lower than factory. That's my argument. Like, if you want solid mount shit, then have solid mount shit. If you want to have a little bit of comfort and whatever else, stick with the factory stuff with a big rubber bushing in there and go that route. That's kind of the point that I'm trying to make right now. So with that said, let me jack the car back up. I'm going to loosen this stuff off. I'm going to try and tweak this way, and we're going to see what's going to happen. But guys, ultimately speaking, especially considering it's on the 2x4s right now, that is not bad for just taking some random coilover that I did a lot of research on, but I'm actually impressing myself a little bit right now. So with that said, let me jack this up and let's see what we can do in terms of adjustability up there. Where we were, you can see the top plate here, and then now we can do that. So we have all that adjustability here, right? And it's actually looking a little bit straighter. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen these off and I'm going to pull this knuckle out, and you guys will see what I mean here in a second. Movement right here, you actually have a little bit of camber movement by default right here. Now usually when I'm lowering Fox bodies and I cut the springs out, I'm usually pushing in. I'm trying to like preload my camber and give myself as much as I can. In this case, I'm actually going to pull it out and see what that does. And I think there might be enough there. Otherwise, what I can do is I can actually hone. I'll show you guys here. Let's just take this off quick. If you guys actually look at this, see how it's a little bit, it's honed a little bit in and out. And that's what's giving us that little bit of movement here to help adjust some of that camber. I don't know if you guys can tell, but that's already looking a lot less cambered between moving these guys and honing that guy, pulling it over just a little bit. I think we might be in pretty good shape. Like, don't get me wrong, we're gonna want a little bit of camber here so we can clear the fenders and not grab onto and cut through the tire like I accidentally did on the passenger side. So let's go ahead. I'm gonna commit to this. I'm actually gonna put the caliper back on. We'll bolt this on and see how it looks. All right, guys, so the reality here is I think this camber is no different than what we started with. And I think the car, you know what, it might actually be a touch higher right now than it was before. Now, mind you, things do need to settle. Let's see. It's got some suspension in it. So, let's see. You know what? I think it's probably pretty damn close to where it was. Just like that and out of the box. And guys, there's tons of adjustability to go lower on this thing. It's just not feasible to drive that much lower on it. Now, the one nice thing about this coilover setup as well is, don't get me wrong, me and Kazel, we're gonna cruise low. We're gonna cruise super low on our way to Detroit. But with the coilovers, it's going to allow us, we'll probably crank it up just a hair to make sure that we don't destroy the car and catch the, like, I'm sure that this Carter's splitter is going to be in multiple pieces by the time that we actually make it to Detroit. But, you know, we don't want to catch our exhaust. We don't want to catch all those other things. But guys, super impressed with this. I'd love to drive on it, but the rear splitter is kind of not really there in a position to allow me to drive on it. And I've only got 3 lug nuts on each wheel and the tie rods are gone and everything else. And I want to be able to save like a test little maiden voyage of sketchiness once Gary shows up. So the reality is the strut needs to come out. I need to fix the top plate, right? Like where I took that bottom piece of the caster camber plate, I'm gonna have to come up with my own plate or weld it up and make it solid, just so that, like right now, I'm sure it's good. that, you know, it's pretty much sandwiching this plate in there, but I would like to get a little bit more surface area just to make sure. But here, let's put it on the soft setting. I bet you guys didn't think there was going to be that much travel. And when this is all said and done, I will share with you guys what the spring rates are and a couple other minor little details for anybody that's interested. But not until I've tested this. This is going to be the test trip, Detroit and back. I've got some other ideas for further development. If this works out, then there will be tip suspension in the future. So I'm going to leave it here. I'm going to put the car on the ground just so we can see it, not with the it up on the 2x4s. And we're going to conclude this video. So let's start the car, move it, see what it looks like. There it is, success. Car's back down on the ground, sitting pretty much the same ride height that it was before. In fact, that rear spring popped itself loose from jacking the front side up here, so I had to get that back and seated accordingly. So the rear coilover, or sorry, the rear adjustable spring perch is going to solve that problem. And same thing in the back, guys. I've got 32 ways of adjustability through the shocks, and I can adjust the travel height into the body here, up and down, depending, so that way we can maximize our travel through those. And then, you know, we'll have the adjustability here on these perches, and then all the different spring rates, so on and so forth, that I'll be able to test out. So there you have it. Hopefully you enjoyed this. I actually really enjoyed doing this video, and I'm really excited to actually be able to test drive and see how this is all going to work in the end. But proof of concept is there. We know it fits. We know it works. We know we can get our camber where we want it with factory settings up here. And we do know that ultimately, if we need to hone out a little bit on the upper strut mount hole, we can do that to get a little bit more travel, or we can hone out a little bit up here. But guys, like, come on, 19-inch wheels, slam down and tuck like this with, you know, acceptable camber by all means. You got to remember, this fender is stretched out. Like, the stock fender would be sitting like in here. This guy's been smashed down and pulled outward. That would be like the perfect setup on a stock fender with rolled lips. There you have it, guys. Lots more to come on the Shipbox-Fox. There's a few last things that we're looking in terms of donations. And remember, anybody who donates is going to get a sticker in the engine bay. So this whole engine bay is going to get redone in some sort of hot fluorescent color of sorts. And there's going to be stickers everywhere on the inside there, representing and giving thanks to everyone that donated to this project. And better yet, for any of you guys that are going to the Motor City Fox Fest show in Detroit, I should say in Dearborn, at the Ford World Headquarters coming up in July, you'll be able to see this beast in person, and tons of other Fox bodies. It's the show I'm looking most forward to this year, so be sure to check it out, and hopefully we'll see you there.